Wilderness, wildlife, natural wonders, the crowning glories of America, shining forth from its national parks. Not all of the national parks enjoy the fame of Yellowstone and the Grand Canyon. Many are secluded, no less wondrous or amazing, simply less known. They are intriguing. Forests of stone, rivers of ice, mountains of fire, magical places, visions of America's beauty, echoing the stories of America's past, legends of the ancient ones, discoveries of traders and trappers, the trials of hardy homesteaders, and the adventures of explorers. More than pretty preserves, these parks are the lifeblood of the American legacy. Their breathtaking beauty and their history reach beyond Yellowstone, beyond the Grand Canyon, and into the soul of America. These are America's historic and scenic national parks. We will explore 25 national parks across 6 regions of the United States: the East, Southwest, North, Great Plains, West, and Alaska. In each park, we'll capture the physical character of a nation and the personal metal of the men and women who people it. Until 1919, all of the national parks in the United States had been west of the Mississippi River. There was a great need to preserve the remaining wilderness and its wildlife in the eastern states. That's where the population was. So Congress began creating national parks east of the Mississippi. We will explore 4 easy-to-reach parks: Acadia National Park, preserving an unmarred stretch of the celebrated coastline of Maine. In the state of Kentucky, Mammoth Cave. In Arkansas, Hot Springs. And in Virginia, the recycled wilderness of Shenandoah. Sunrise on the Atlantic, the morning sun, lighting the North American continent, falls first on the stony shores of the easternmost national park. Acadia is rugged and beautiful. Miles of rocky coastline, dense forests rimming crystalline lakes, and overlooking the sea, the smooth domes of mountains shaped by glaciers. Glacial ice roughed the outline of Acadia. Now Atlantic waves refine it. Acadia first came to the world's attention in 1604, when French explorer Samuel de Champlain, perhaps marveling himself at the land's scenic splendor, crashed his ship into it. Champlain named this island Île de Mont Désert, Island of Bare Mountains. Today it remains Mont Désert, or Mount Desert, the heart of Acadia. Though occasional territorial skirmishes erupted here, Acadia remained pristine, relatively untouched for centuries. Home to a scattering of hardy New Englanders, farmers, lumbermen, shipbuilders, and fishermen, plumbing the depths of the Atlantic for that king of crustaceans, the lobster. But in 1844, a new breed began filtering onto Mount Desert Island. Artists. Painters Thomas Cole, Frederick Church, and others from the Hudson River School of Painting splashed Acadia's charms onto magazine covers across America. Their works attracted a group calling themselves rusticators, hearty nature lovers who wanted to experience Acadia firsthand. And soon after the rusticators came the aristocrats, the Somerset, Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Astor, and Ford. America's richest rich came here to escape the sweltering city and spend a month in the rustic wilds of Maine. They built storybook mansions with sea views, and in the tradition of rustification, called them cottages. Then a palace of belle arts, a racetrack. Mount Desert spun in a whirl of high society events. Afternoon teas, croquet and crumpets, and cucumber sandwiches. Strolls down sylvan paths. Charmed by Acadia's beauty, the citified gentry set out to preserve Mount Desert Island. A neighborhood coalition headed by Washington insider George B. Dorr and Harvard President Charles Eliot gathered scenic lands into a single public trust. In 1919, that trust became Acadia National Park, America's first national park east of the Mississippi, and the first anywhere made entirely of donated lands. John D. Rockefeller Jr. donated over a third of those lands, and trained at Harvard in landscape architecture, set about designing Acadia's carriage roads. He spent 20 years and $20 million on the project, and strictly prohibited the motor car. Today, visitors still enjoy forest outings on horse-drawn carriages, and bicyclists meander along the 46 miles of carefully crafted roads. In 1947, a forest fire whipped through Acadia. It raged unchecked for 11 days, destroying over 17,000 acres and nearly all the mansions. It branded a dark end to an elegant era. But the natural beauty of Acadia survived. Cresting on the summit of Mount Cadillac, the highest point on America's eastern seaboard, Acadia still charms the visitor. They stop here to feel the glacial rounded granite and marvel that over 6,000 feet of ice once crushed down upon this very spot. Acadia National Park remains a land of rugged beauty, basking in America's first light from dawn to dusk. There is no national park that probes more deeply into the earth than Mammoth Cave. Here, through a cavity in the earth, light is beamed into a dark underground world that began 300 million years ago. A world of labyrinths and palatial chambers lined with columns of joined stalactites and stalagmites. They echo the cave's history, a history as fantastical as these limestone specters. Local Indians knew about Mammoth Cave some 2,000 years BC. The Indians even mined the cave for gypsum, which, since it glitters magically, was probably regarded as a potent medicine for their ceremonies. There was mining going on here again during the War of 1812. America needed gunpowder to fight the British. Saltpeter from the cave could be processed into explosives. Enough saltpeter was mined from Mammoth Cave to fire almost half of the guns used in the American war effort. In 1838, a local lawyer bought the cave outright as a tourist attraction. Slaves served as guides. One of those guides was a remarkable young man named Stephen Bishop. Bishop probed passages that had never before been reached, discovering a subterranean river and the Mammoth Dome.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie.
The cave once echoed with scripture, chapter and verse, when one of the chambers was used to house church services.
Shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me.
In 1842, it served as the world's first underground hospital for victims of tuberculosis. Unfortunately, the cave's rarefied atmosphere proved not to be a cure. Today's visitors may enter these awesome chambers with a knowledge of the history of this, the world's longest cave, and knowing that the real treasures are here to discover for themselves. People think all national parks exist in a wilderness that's almost mythical. Well, generally speaking, that's true. But there's one national park you can get to by taxi: Hot Springs. Smallest of the national parks, it spreads over a few blocks of a bustling little Arkansas city, and the forest fringing it. But the hot springs came first. The city grew up around them. Thousands of years ago, rainwater started seeping into porous rocks and soil to depths of 4,000 feet. Heated in the cauldron of the Earth's innards, these waters began percolating back to the surface with a temperature of 143 degrees Fahrenheit. Early Indians, the first to bathe here, believed that these springs held a great spirit who heated the waters with his breath. The first European to bathe in these springs was Hernando de Soto, the explorer who discovered Florida for Spain. That was back in 1541. If he really was the first, he had no idea what he was starting. President Thomas Jefferson acquired the springs with the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. He sent scientists who came back glowing. This encouraged health seekers to take the waters. In 1832, President Andrew Jackson set aside Hot Springs as a special reservation. This was 40 years before Yellowstone. Then in 1921, Hot Springs, Arkansas, the great American spa, was designated a national park. certainly one of the most accessible, and the only national park in the United States that can boast a bathhouse row as one of its attractions. The list of notables who've bathed here reads like a who's who of what might seem a more innocent age. John L. Sullivan, the boxer. Billy Sunday, the evangelist. Heavyweight champion Jack Dempsey. And Harry, the buck stops here, Truman. Are the steaming waters from these 47 springs, 850,000 gallons every day, the elixir of health and longevity they once claimed to be? The park makes no such claims. Still, a trip to hot springs can add to one's feeling of well-being. And it's fun to sip the champagne of pure waters and then get into a bath with history. At Shenandoah National Park, a thin ribbon of highway meanders down the back of the Appalachian Mountains. The Skyline Drive. To the east, the Piedmont. To the west, the Shenandoah Valley. Shenandoah is the story of man's relationship to the land and his impact on it. Native Americans used the land lightly. Their fires created the open expanse we call Big Meadow. Here they hunted white-tailed deer, which still roam and enjoy the lush growth of the area. In the 1800s, settlers occupied the area, followed by miners, tree cutters, and hill farmers. Eroded and devastated by generations of use, the land was worn out. Unlike Western parks, which were created out of existing federal lands, this park was purchased by the people and the state of Virginia, then presented to the United States government. President Franklin D. Roosevelt dedicated the park in 1936.
And so, my friends, I now take great pleasure in dedicating Shenandoah National Park, of dedicating it to this and to succeeding generations of Americans for the recreation and for the recreation which we find here.
The Civilian Conservation Corps worked to restore the land and build recreational facilities throughout the park. In 1939, the Skyline Drive was completed. The same drive that millions enjoy today. It runs 105 miles down the spine of the Blue Ridge. Off each side of the ridge, trails lead into the forests, punctuated with sounds of brooks, streams, cascades, and waterfalls. Today the land has healed. The ancient granite and metamorphic lava, in some areas over 1 billion years old, is covered with a beautiful, recycled wilderness. Some of our treasured preserves lie basking in America's Southwest. In Texas, 2 national parks. One is Guadalupe Mountains, preserving America's ancient geologic past. Another is Big Bend, which runs smack into the Rio Grande. In Arizona, the colorful petrified forest. In Utah, the rock formations and pioneer settlements of Capitol Reef. And in Colorado, Mesa Verde National Park, preserving ancient ruins of the Anasazi Indians. When visitors cross the New Mexican border into West Texas, they enter a parched desert. Had they been able to make that trip 250 million years ago, these same waterless flatlands would have looked like this. Before there were animals on this planet, as we know them, or even flowering plants, a salty sea covered thousands of square miles of what is now West Texas. Then, some 200 million years ago, that sea ebbed and disappeared, leaving an ocean reef stranded and dead in the killing sun. After being buried for eons under silt, it broke out of its tomb with the Earth's uplift. Now it stands a desert-haunting ghost. It's strange walking on waterless salt flats of what once had been an ocean floor and gazing up at El Capitan, realizing that this 8,085-foot monolith had once been underwater. That's just one of the experiences that makes Guadalupe National Park unusual. This fossil reef rises to become Guadalupe Peak, the highest mountain in Texas. These peaks poke into an underbelly of clouds, as though thirsting for the water they were once submerged in. Their porous limestone absorbs moisture from the sky. Year-round, the sky waters seep through the fossil reef, often underground, and sometimes bursting forth as life-giving springs. New life erupts. Once again, this reef is teeming with living things. But with forms of life that differ greatly from those which lived on this planet millions of years ago. If you travel farther south in Texas, you'll be crossing the Chihuahuan Desert, reaching 1,000 miles from the heart of Old Mexico into the southwestern United States. A river, the Rio Grande, loops from the Rockies in Colorado to the Gulf of Mexico, its flow bending through the vast Chihuahuan Desert. In the deep southwest, this is called Big Bend country. Uninhabited? It certainly looks it. But looks can be deceiving. When the Spanish first saw it, they called it Despoblado, the uninhabited land. Today it's called Big Bend National Park, and it is inhabited by over 5,000 species of living things, and by visitors who find the area alive with things to see. The river bends around the Chisos Mountains. Atop these peaks grows forest, holding moisture and giving shade in this place of punishing sun. Desert, yes, but there are also desert grasslands. And there's water. In the flow of the Rio Grande, the river's northern and southern banks are oasis green. This meandering river is the border between two sovereign nations, the United States of America and the Republic of Mexico. This border has not always been inviolate. Rustlers have raided here, and bandits looted. When pursued, they retreated into the mountains or fled across the river into Mexico. One was Doroteo Arango, a volatile mixture of Robin Hood and bandito, who was known on both sides of the United States-Mexican border as Pancho Villa. He was a brilliant horseman, marksman, and general. This is a land of seasonal variety. For a few short weeks each spring, the hidden beauty of Big Bend bursts into color. And it is then that the park's visitors behold that rare kind of beauty, a desert in bloom. Arizona's petrified forest is a unique wonder. It's really a giant historical record of ancient life. Forests frozen in stone, a magnificent gallery of natural art. It might be said that the petrified forest resembles a moonscape, except that the moon is colorless. Here, these blistered shapes, crags, buttes, gnarls, trunks, and gaping maws, are saturated with color. Indeed, the colorful landscape is called the Painted Desert. Once, this was a swamp, subtropical forest with tangles of steaming green overgrowth. But that was 225 million years ago. Fallen trees floated in waters rich in silica. The logs jammed. They were covered with mud and sand. When they surfaced after eons, the tree's wood fibers had absorbed large amounts of silica from the water. In time, mind-boggling stretches of time, the trees turned to stone. Sometimes embedded in petrified wood, caches of semi-precious stone await discovery. Amethyst, jasper, and quartz of different colors. The treasure trove here is unsurpassed in variety and abundance anywhere in the world. In Capitol Reef in the heart of Utah, 65 million years ago, on this primeval landscape, nature made a wrinkle, which creased and with erosion eventually crinkled into a 100-mile ridge of serrated rock. Siltstones, sandstones in fantasy shapes, and spectral colors turned the dust-veiled eyes of those who first saw them to remembered images. The Navajo call this the land of the sleeping rainbow. Pioneers and later visitors saw these rocky forms as something closer to home. They named this the Castle. This formation, more than 500 feet high, was called Chimney Rock. These white sandstone cupolas recall the domes of Capitol buildings. And these jagged ridges, called reefs, barriers to passage. Hence the name Capitol Reef. Over 1,000 years ago, semi-nomadic hunters and gatherers settled here. They left snatches of their story in rock art on canyon walls. 900 years later, tough-minded Mormons took refuge in this hidden heartland. Their church was a virile outcrop of frontier Christianity, and if anyone could turn this shale into a garden, it was a Mormon. There was good reason for hiding here. It was the 1880s, and federal authorities were flushing out Mormons who practiced plural marriage, which had been sanctioned by their church. It would be hard for the federal marshals to find them here. It was too tough. In flexing their collective muscle, these Mormons turned the valley of their bleak hideaway into flourishing orchards. For 80 years, they sold produce to prospectors and cowboys. They even peddled to Butch Cassidy and the Wild Bunch, who passed through on their way to nearby Robber's Roost. It wasn't until the 1960s that the last family left. 285 miles east of Capitol Reef, in the southwest corner of Colorado, lies Mesa Verde National Park, a bastion of the largest archaeological preserve in the United States and one of its oldest mysteries. These magnificent cliff cities were constructed by a prehistoric Stone Age people. The Navajo called them the Ancient Ones, the Anasazi. These famous structures are only part of the Mesa Verde story. The Anasazi arrived here just 600 years after the birth of Christ. They remained on the mesa for over 700 years. Then they disappeared. Centuries earlier, their ancestors made a remarkable transformation. From hunter-gatherers to farmers, working with simple tools, they coaxed squash, beans, and corn from the desert soil. At first, they dwelled in pit homes, then pueblos resembling those still used by the Hopi Indians of Arizona. It wasn't until the end of their tenure on the mesa that they constructed these fantastical structures. Cliff Palace, with over 200 rooms. And since its discovery, this cliff city has left archaeologists with one lingering question. Why? Why did they leave their pueblos for the cliff dwellings? And where did they go? Were they driven away by drought? By wars? Stored food and pottery hint that they had planned to return, but they never did. Today these ruins stand as a monument to their past. There are parks that push up to the Canadian border as well. In Minnesota, Voyageurs, and in Michigan's Lake Superior Isle Royal. Voyageurs National Park straddles a lush woods and water wilderness just south enough to belong to the United States. It's a waterland, lakes with the blue sparkle of a sapphire. Ponds bustling with wildlife. The sweet sour wet of the forest floor with its nap of velvety moss. Oddly, these wild Minnesota waterlands owe their name to a fashionable trend. The 1700s knew a growing demand for furs, particularly beaver furs for hats, bicorns, tricorns, and later a tall topper appropriately named the beaver. These waterlands were a rich source of dam-building beaver, which, incidentally, is North America's largest rodent. Ojibwe Indians hunted them for trade. The voice of the loon. A plaintive call that seems to sound out of the past. Now the songs of the voyageurs, bridging the border between Canada and the United States, bridging centuries. Calico shirts, their red knitted toques set rakishly over the dare-me twinkling of their eyes, and their voices raised in lusty song. These are the voyageurs. They came singing, their canoes loaded with cloth, blankets, firearms, and kettles for trade with the Indians. Their stamina was legendary. Voyageurs were usually 150-pounders, averaging 5.5 feet in height. Yet these crews of 6 to 10 men cheerfully paddled from 14 to 16 hours a day. Each hour, they'd take time for a pipe. Distances weren't figured in the number of miles, but in the number of pipes smoked. It was a matter of supply and demand. The goods they hauled to the Indian trappers were exchanged for precious beaver pelts. These voyageurs were the spine of the Northwest Company's fur trade. But fashions changed. The crowning beaver gave way to the silk topper. The demand for pelts ceased, and the voyageurs sang no more. Today, these waterways are a playground for visitors, and no wonder they come. In the sweet, pine-scented air, you can still feel the spirit of those irrepressible voyageurs. Nearby, in the northwest corner of Lake Superior, the largest freshwater lake on Earth, lies the most remote national park in the contiguous 48 states. Isle Royale. A 45-square-mile refuge of glacier-scarred volcanic rock. Richly forested with conifers, paper birch, aspen, and cedar. A fabled wilderness. Compared with other national parks, Isle Royale hosts few visitors. But visitors who come here stay longer. They're of the kind who explore for themselves. It boasts a unique island ecosystem, where that stalwart predator, the wolf, lives in dynamic interaction with that most massive member of the deer family, the moose. On the west end of the island stands a much-needed lighthouse. It's called, trustfully, Rock of Ages. In the dead middle of shipping lanes, on the often angry waters of this inland sea, this island can be a hull-busting boulder to ships. Shipwrecks ring the park. Ships with regal names like the Monarch, the Emperor. Ships proudly patriotic like the America. This ship's graveyard is the Underwater Museum of Isle Royale National Park. For the next historic and scenic national parks, we travel to the Dakotas, Wind Cave and Badlands National Park in South Dakota. And in North Dakota, a park named after the president who did more than any other who held that office to foster the national park system, Theodore Roosevelt. It was in the Dakotas that he found the training ground to become a champion of the American wilderness. When he was born in 1858, the Black Hills were holy ground sacred to the great buffalo hunting tribes of the plains. On the southeastern shoulder of the Black Hills, not far from Mount Rushmore, is Wind Cave. Wind Cave is really two parks in one. On its sunlit rolling grasslands and forests, it's a wildlife preserve. While under the earth wind over 56 miles of caverns, embellished with geological excess. Dakota's grasslands belong to the wind. The wind moans, but sometimes it sings and whistles. And one day, in 1881, the wind signaled a discovery. That day, the Bingham brothers, Tom and Jesse, were tracking a wounded deer when they heard a whistling from the ground. When they knelt down to investigate a strange blowhole, the wind blew off one of their hats. This incident led to the discovery of one of the world's oldest caves. The hidden limestone cave was soon opened to tourism. Today, it anchors a national park. Caverns encrusted with geological fancies that make sense only after we nickname them with a familiar. Boxwork, frostwork, popcorn formations. Beyond the 1.5 miles of public trails, cavers are exploring, still pushing out into the unknown. Long before Jesse Bingham had his hat blown off at the blowhole, the Sioux knew of this cave. They believed that the Great Spirit sent the buffalo from this cave to their Sioux hunting grounds. Wind ripples the grass here, too, in Badlands National Park, through the flats of the upper prairies, over the floodplain of the White River, lashing at the Badlands wall, in a landscape ever shaped and reshaped by erosion. The Badlands stretch along the White River for 100 miles. Why are these lands dubbed bad? You need only step off the established trail to find out. Even the Sioux called it Makusika, meaning land bad. Fortunately for visitors, the park's trails are easily negotiated and points of interest well organized, such as the display of fossilized remains of hundreds of ancient animals from the Oligocene times. Some 200 years ago, these grasslands were dense with bison, the American buffalo. Then an estimated 60 million of them roamed the North American plains. For centuries, Plains Indians hunted them. Before the coming of the Spanish, they'd stampede them over cliffs as one way of downing them. With the Spanish explorers came horses, horses for trade, horses that broke away and reverted to a wild state. The Plains tribes soon learned to master the animal. Their braves became skilled and daring riders. Now they hunted buffalo on horseback. The buffalo provided everything they needed: food, hides for robes, clothes, drumheads, covering for their teepees, sinews for bowstrings, hair for rope, horn for cooking utensils. Clearly, the buffalo sustained their very existence. Indian hunters coexisted with the buffalo. White hunters almost annihilated them, at first for hides, then for the tongues, which were considered a table delicacy, and then, it seems, to wipe out the buffalo as a food source, so as to starve the Indians into submission. Teddy Roosevelt once commented sadly, "Never before were so many large wild animals of one species slain in so short a space of time." Stronghold Table, the scene of many a ritual ghost dance. Once powerful tribes, still proud, were forced to live on handouts. In their despair, many of these tribal people turned to religious medicine, a revival of chants and dances that they believed would magically bring back the buffalo. But whites were wary of it. They called it the ghost dance cult, and it made them uneasy. 3 days after Christmas of 1890, at a creek called Wounded Knee, there was a scuffle between some trigger-happy troopers of the 7th U.S. Cavalry, Custer's old regiment, and a camp of 350 Sioux men, women, and children. The troopers ran amok, raking the poorly armed Indians with Gatling guns from the hilltops. It's estimated that 200, some say 300 Indians died. Many were children. The event is often referred to as the Battle of Wounded Knee. It wasn't a battle at all. It was a massacre. In a way, the buffalo have returned to the Badlands, due more to movements begun by people like Theodore Roosevelt than to the silent songs of the ghost dancers. Today, more than 80,000 bison live on the plains of North America. Some of them roam on the North Dakota Badlands in the only national park that's named for a president. Theodore Roosevelt, who in his lifetime was often referred to as just plain TR. 25-year-old Theodore was shattered when he came out here in 1884. That year, both his wife and his mother died. On the same day, he sought solace on what was then a ranch, the Maltese Cross Ranch he'd invested in the previous year. He had retired from public life. Now he would throw himself into the vigorous job of cattle ranching. From a family line of early Dutch settlers in New York, TR had a pampered upbringing. He had been sickly, weak, and nearsighted, but he was full of pluck. To overcome his puniness, he threw himself into what he extolled as the strenuous life. He built muscle. He became a hunter, an explorer, and a forceful advocate of the out-of-doors. Now, with his squeaky voice and Eastern manners, he became a frontier rancher. His ranch hands may have laughed at him at first. To them, he was the four-eyed dude. Theodore Roosevelt soon won their respect. Stories began circulating about how he won a fight with his bare fists against a drunken gunman, and how he captured 3 desperados whom he turned over to the law. Theodore Roosevelt fell in love with this land. It healed his aching spirit. It became a source of his tremendous energy. When he returned to public life to become the 26th President of the United States, the inspiration that he drew from this frontier became the breath of every national park in the United States. And perhaps it was out of his passion for the preservation of the wilderness that he charted a course for a nation's future. To almost everyone in the world, the name California rings of the Golden West. It hosts a trove of national parks. 2 parks added in 1994 preserve California's desert regions. Joshua Tree and Death Valley, and at the southern tip of the Cascade Mountain Range, Lassen Volcanic. Sitting stately together, Kings Canyon and Sequoia. Offshore, the Channel Islands. With courage and faith, he led his people into a land of milk and honey. Joshua. When those dogged pioneers, the Mormons, traversed this wilderness, this native plant symbolized their Joshua, their biblical hero. And so they christened it the Joshua Tree. Here in Joshua Tree National Park, two deserts meet. Forests of Joshuas, sprouting from the upper desert of the Mojave, are known nowhere else in the world. Grass stubbles these valleys, providing pastures for the high-ground ranching that flourished here until 1936. But with ranching came rustling. Bill McHaney and his brother Jim of the Hidden Valley Ranch were legends. They'd rustle cattle, drive them to these pastures, and there rebrand them. Then they'd sell them at a coastal market. Choyo, jumping cactus to old-timers, grows in the southern low end of the park. This landscape, now seared and parched, bursts into garden with the rains of spring. Only a few shy springs trickle year-round. As a spring, it's sparse, but here it is an oasis. Birds find these springs. Prehistoric Indians raised their camps around them, and they were the waterholes for prospectors with a thirst for gold. They abandoned their mines along with dreams of sudden wealth. The grit of pioneers, the greed of rustlers, and the dreams of gold, these still lurk in the deserts of Joshua Tree National Park. Just north of Joshua Tree, the continent's driest, lowest, hottest place, Death Valley. In October of 1849, the California gold rush was a bona fide boom. But one eager westbound party took an ill-advised shortcut, and 2 days later entered what they called a splendid scene of grand desolation. Food and water were scarce. One by one, oxen were slaughtered and eaten. Wagons were left behind. Children cried to their mothers for water. By Christmas Day, the party staggered to a spring on the valley floor and quit. 2 able-bodied men set off over the towering Panamint Mountains, praying that Los Angeles and help lay just beyond. It didn't. But 3 desperate weeks later, they did return with help, and as the exhausted party finally crested the mountains, one weary woman looked back and rasped, "Goodbye, Death Valley." Of course, with later rumors of gold and silver deposits in the region, it wasn't long before others were saying, "Hello, Death Valley." And when borax, a mineral used in glass and ceramics, was discovered, the wagons really began to roll. 30-ton wagon trains hauled by 20 mule teams, actually 18 mules and a pair of horses. For 5 years, these massive outfits rumbled 165 miles to the nearest railhead and rest. Every year, the month of July averages 116 degrees Fahrenheit, cooling down to a brisk 88 at night. 351 days a year, there's sun, broken up by barely enough rain to fill a shot glass. The little that does fall seeps down, and down, and down to bad water, 282 feet below sea level. This baked, blistering region seems to slow the march of time. Flowers may bloom only once every 10 years. Boulders skate for centuries across a sporadically slickened lake. And parched winds polish stones with 1,000 years of desert varnish. It's a desolate, alien world that's strangely appealing. People are drawn to Death Valley, mesmerized, perhaps because the desert is simple, elemental. And what a thrill it is to plumb the depths of Death Valley and come out alive. In Northern California, an entirely different terrain, lush forests, lakes amid meadows of wildflowers, serenity. This is Lassen Volcanic National Park. Peaceful looking, this 10,457-foot peak rises at the southern end of the Cascade Mountain Range, a fired-up mountain range that pushes north to the Canadian province of British Columbia. Fanged with volcanoes, Crater Lake, and Mount Hood in Oregon State. And in the state of Washington, snowy Mount Rainier, Mount St. Helens. We've had recent evidence of what a fire breather it can be. The Yahi, a tribe native to these parts, was massacred by white settlers in 1871. Few survived. One took refuge in the shadows of this peak. He is known to history as Ishi, the last Stone Age survivor in the United States. Spanish explorers named it San Jose. Gold seekers knew it as Mount Joseph. Mapmakers charted it as Snow Butte. Then, after a colorful dame who'd been a guide in the area, the local people called it Lassen's Peak. The name stuck. In 1914, peaceful Lassen's Peak began making noises. On June 14th of that year, at 9:43 a.m. local time, Benjamin Franklin Loomis readied his camera as the northwest side of the mountain was moving. These are his incredible photos. The Lassen volcano was grumbling, then exploding. A slush of cinders and melting snow formed a mud flow that poured into the valleys for up to 30 miles. Engorged with hot lava, the mountain had been plugged for 200 years. Now it exploded, blasting the peak wide open. In 1915, a cloud of debris rose 7 miles high, and torrents of ash whipped the land like a hurricane from hell. The eruptions fulminated through 1916. Then, in the year 1917, amid avalanches of red-hot boulders, Lassen slowly gurgled into uneasy quietude. In 3 years, it had erupted almost 300 times. Today, exploring Mount Lassen Volcanic National Park is both peaceful and pleasant. A chance to explore life renewed. With its 150 miles of trails, Lassen is a place of enchantment for hikers and backpackers. The sights are idyllic until reaching a kind of Dante's Inferno, or more literally, thermal areas, remind us that beneath this crusty ground, there is imprisoned a seething volcano. These sites are branded with such names as Devil's Kitchen, sulfur works, and Bumpus Hell. To explore this park, to probe its depths, its meaning, can be a life-enriching experience. Out of death comes rebirth. Lassen is a testimony not only to the overwhelming power of a volcano to destroy. It stands for the creation of new life in abundance. On the eastern reaches of California stands a 400-mile upthrust of sawtooth mountains with sharp but snow-blunted peaks nipping at the sky. These are the Sierra Nevadas. Marked out in the range's southern end are two national treasures, Sequoia, an old-timer dating back to 1890, and Kings Canyon, a youngster inducted into the park system in 1940. They're back-to-back, these two parks, guarding a precious wilderness. The 500,000 acres of Kings Canyon Park plunge into the V of one of the deepest canyons in the United States, deeper than the Grand Canyon. Here the cool, clean air is like wine, making for a heady high country exhilaration. There is a dizzying array of waterfalls, freshets, rapids, and the scudding clouds overhead seem just a jump above you. The eastern expanse unfolds in the ups and downs of a varied wilderness. From the Sierra Nevada's over 14,000-foot-high eastern wall to grassy meadows and wandering streams. Not all of the pleasures of these parks are breathtaking spectacles. There are the pleasures of the Sierra's life in little. Wildflowers. They're rusting sculptures, abandoned by industry and rejected by the wilderness. They recall the logging that once threatened this area in the late 1800s. Now, they're monuments to the preservation of a wilderness over its destruction. Sequoia National Park, America's second oldest, centers around a giant forest of the trees that have given it its name. The life of the most massive living thing on Earth is programmed in a seed as light and as fragile as an oatmeal flake. 200 of these seeds are cooped in a cone the size of a hen's egg. Fires, and for millions of years lightning-caused fires, have been a natural burn-off in these forests. Prepare the soil for the seeds. Very thick bark pretty well protects the trees from flame damage. To grow naturally, sequoias need the right conditions: soil, moisture, climate. In the whole world, there are only 76 groves in which these trees grow natively, all of them on the western slopes of the Sierra Nevada. 30 of these groves are in Kings Canyon and Sequoia National Parks. The granddaddy of all sequoias is named after General Sherman, the Civil War general who is famous, or infamous, for his march through Georgia. General Sherman is 270 feet high and still growing. It's the most massive living thing in the world. From the 14th century into the 1880s, Indians had lived here. They left picture stories on the rocks. And mortar holes used in pounding acorn into meal, the staple of their diet. Some say that these groups of Indians lived side by side in peace and we presume in happiness. Perhaps it is their legacy that makes these parks so pleasant to visit. Peace and happiness. As skipper of a two-caravel fleet, he was seeking that fabled trade route between Europe and Asia, the Northwest Passage. And like all others before him, he never found it. What he did discover was California. He was Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, a Portuguese navigator in the service of Spain. In 1542, he anchored on what was later named San Miguel, one of the 8 islands in the Santa Barbara Channel. 5 of those islands are now protected at Channel Islands National Park. He claimed the islands and the California coast for the Spanish crown. Cabrillo soon learned that he wasn't the first man to set foot here. Human inhabitants predated his expedition by more than 1,000 years. It was the Chumash, meaning islanders, whom Cabrillo encountered, a thriving tribe of traders. Though they can't say exactly where, most historians believe that Cabrillo is buried in these islands. There is a monument to Cabrillo on a wind-blown knoll on the island of San Miguel. Like Cabrillo, most of today's explorers of the Channel Islands, which were established as a national park in 1980, arrived by water. Visitors come to learn, to satisfy curiosity. They come for adventure. These islands are pure California. California as it must have looked 500 years ago. The park, which is an international biosphere reserve, takes in the northern 5 islands of the 8 Channel Islands and 1 mile of ocean around each island. Largest of the 5 islands is Santa Cruz, which means Holy Cross. Almost as large as Santa Cruz is neighboring Santa Rosa. This lonely island, often fog-draped, is San Miguel. This island is a vast rookery for finfoots, pinnipeds, with more kinds of seals and sea lions than any other rookery on Earth. In the past, they were hunted to near extinction, but no longer. Today, this is sanctuary. Rising 40 feet out of the sea is Arch Rock, nature's grand entranceway to Anacapa, the most visited island in the park. All of the other Channel Islands were named by the Spanish with an eye for storing treasures in heaven. But the name Anacapa, which means mirage, is pure Chumash Indian. It's a place of primeval beauty. Here, sea life can be observed as though in an aquarium. But this entire park is a great window to the sea's depths. A 6-mile area around each island has been designated a national marine sanctuary. You're aware of staring into a sinuous forest of kelp reaching upward from 100 feet below for sunlight. This underwater forest shelters hundreds of kinds of unusual fish, mollusks, crustaceans. This is a home for plankton, the tiniest of marine organisms, and for the largest animal on Earth. In mid-autumn, the gray whales leave their feeding grounds in Alaska's frigid Bering Sea and swim south to the warm lagoons of Baja California, where they breed. It's a 6,000-mile trip. Starting at the end of December, the gray whales make a stop en route at the Channel Islands. Here, they rest and eat. The migrating giant feeding upon the microscopic plankton at Channel Islands National Park. In the far north, beyond the boundaries of the contiguous 48 states, is a land of mind-boggling extremes. The Alaskan wilderness. In 5 rugged parks, we understand why Alaska has been dubbed the last frontier. In the north, 2 parks guard jealously a primal wilderness, gates of the Arctic National Park and Kobuk Valley. In the south, the wilderness preserve of Kenai Fjords and volcanic Katmai National Park. In south-central Alaska, America's largest national park, Wrangell St. Elias, is home to towering peaks in husks of glacial ice. Over 10,000 years ago, fearless migrants from Asia crossed into North America by way of Alaska. The new continent held a bonanza of wildlife for these Stone Age hunters. Gates of the Arctic National Park is primeval Alaska, frozen in time. Granite crags and spires tower over gaunt and lonely land, much as it was when those first nomads discovered it. Its landscape veers to astounding extremes, from brilliant glacial lakes to treeless tundra. This is truly one of the world's last great wild places. The jagged upthrust peaks of the Arrogitch dominate the landscape. Part of the Brooks Range, the northernmost reach of the Rocky Mountains. A place of dire and unpredictable weather, where a winter's day might drop to minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And summers range from sweltering 90 degrees to snowstorms. 5 wilderness rivers have headwaters located in the park, including the Kobuk. River rafters thrilled at the challenges of America's most pristine waters. Downriver is another rugged Alaskan preserve, Kobuk Valley National Park. Here the pale jade waters weave past magnificent mountains, tundra, and boreal forest. But its most startling turn is the great Kobuk sand dunes. Although Kobuk Valley National Park lies well above the Arctic Circle, part of it is sanded over by dunes, an Arctic Sahara. Where temperatures are known to exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit, these shifting sands are the most turbulent dunes in Arctic North America. The Kobuk Valley preserves ancient hunting grounds of the Eskimo. Subsistence hunting is still allowed in the park. Twice yearly, it hosts one of the world's epic wildlife spectacles, the migration of caribou. Much like the wildebeest of the Serengeti, these scattered bands gather until they number as many as 450,000. Endless files of animals, steadily trekking over deeply worn trails toward their ancestral grounds. One of the most challenging obstacles, the waters of the Kobuk. Eskimo hunters patrol the river. The caribou comb the shores, searching for a crossing point. Then, a herd plunges into the river. Now they're easy prey for the families who need the caribou meat to survive. This herd crosses unharmed. Not rivers, mountains, nor man can halt the migrating cycles of the caribou. Far south, along Alaska's pristine coastal wilderness, is Kenai Fjords National Park. Thousands of years after those Ice Age adventurers discovered Alaska, frail craft, manned by Russians, skirted the shores. Vitus Bering was the first. In 1741, he explored the coast and discovered that the Alaskan waters abounded with sea otters. He quickly claimed the area for his motherland. The thick fur of the sea otter was irresistible to the Russians. They would risk anything to harvest the pelts, even human lives, or the extinction of an entire species. Alaska's Russian legacy lives on in rustic churches, a native religion, and names, Russian names that line the maps: Sitka, Kodiak, and Sildoya. The Russians tapped the rich sea life of the Kenai Peninsula as a resource. Today, it's preserved. Kenai fjords characterize most of the Alaskan coastline. Wild, rugged, beautiful, and a sanctuary for a multitude of wildlife. The fjords are actually valleys carved by ancient glaciers and flooded by coastal waters. Scores of them jag in and out along the mountain coastline. Intertwined like fingers on folded hands, land and sea meet with stunning abruptness. Glaciers still inch down the mountainsides. Fueled by the Harding ice field, a 300-square-mile relic of the Pleistocene age. Broken only by the occasional Nunatak, the lone peak of a buried mountain. 6 glaciers reach the sea at Kenai Fjords, where they calve massive chunks of ice into the sea. Russian sailors were focused on the animals of the Kenai, particularly sea otters. They enslaved native peoples and ordered them to hunt the otters from the deep blue waters. From China to Europe, the otter's lush, cold-enduring fur became the coats, the hats, the adornments of society. When the supply of otters ran out, the Russians moved on. Sea otters are no longer hunted, protected now. They are making a comeback in Kenai Fjords National Park. At the heart of Alaska's south-central mountain wilderness lies America's largest national park, Wrangell St. Elias. 6 Yellowstones would fit inside the boundaries of this massive preserve. 3 major mountain ranges form its backbone. To the north, the glacier-capped Wrangells. In the south, the smallest of the 3 ranges, the Chugach. And to the east, the highest coastal mountain range in the world, named St. Elias by the Russians. Its crowning peak, the second highest in the United States. The Russians named these mountains, but they hardly explored them. It wasn't until Russian America became American Alaska that traders and trappers began breaking through the mountain barrier to explore Wrangell St. Elias's interior. What the Americans found would have been of great interest to the Russians. Mineral wealth, gold and silver, yes, but also copper, the richest deposit of copper in the world. For centuries, native people took copper from the hills. They traded handcrafted copper tools with white trappers and settlers. But money-hungry American entrepreneurs were interested in more than a few copper knives. Buried within this fortress of mountains was the motherlode, but they would have to cross 200 miles of wilderness to dig it out. In 1906, construction began on a railroad system that breached the glacier-fed rivers and mile-wide valleys that cut through the forest of the grizzly bear. It was an incredible engineering feat. After half a decade and $20 million, the tracks finally reached the Kennecott mine. Soon, tiny Kennecott sprouted tramways, bunkhouses, ore processing buildings, a power plant and hospital. Over 500 employees inundated the streets and began working the mines. Over a period of 25 years, Kennecott produced $300 million worth of copper. But in 1938, the bottom fell out of Alaska's copper business. Within hours, hundreds of people abandoned their homes and livelihood and caught the last train out of Kennecott. The ruins of Kennecott still haunt the hillside. A testament to untamed Alaska. It has survived the miners, survived the Russians, and now awaits the explorer, the adventurer, ready to discover the true treasure of Alaska. Sitting at the base of that sweeping chain of islands called the Aleutians, Katmai National Park overlooks one of the hottest volcanic spots on Earth. Of North America's 40 volcanoes, 33 lie restlessly in this chain, and over a dozen within Katmai's borders. Any one of Katmai's volcanoes can erupt and reshape the landscape. It's happened before. This barren waste is a leftover of the 1912 eruption of the Novarupta volcano. With a blast 10 times more powerful than the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, it collapsed the nearby summit of Mount Katmai, sending 33 million tons of pumice and ash into the air, filling this once lush valley with 300 feet of debris. Today, life is returning, slowly. Back in the 1920s, scientists investigated the valley. At the time, fumaroles were still steaming at 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. The whole valley hissed as hot gases and scalding jets of steam spewed from the fissured floor. They named it the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. Through a series of expeditions, they discovered that the valley was cooling, becoming less active. The thousands of steaming fumaroles have since subsided. Hikers entering the valley today encounter a lifeless moonscape. However, in wind-sheltered spots, a few brave plants are returning. This valley is a stark reminder of the tremendous volcanic forces beneath Katmai National Park. This is a wilderness of untamed rivers, island-studded lakes, coastal inlets. The undeniable king of Katmai is the Alaskan brown bear. Over 800 brown bears reside in this preserve, some weighing up to 1,300 pounds. These coastal brownies are larger than their inland cousins, the grizzlies. They are the largest carnivorous land mammals in the world. In part, their size is due to Katmai's rich supply of salmon. July sees the spawning salmon return from the sea. Sport fishermen covet the same fish. But in Alaska, bears have the first rights on the salmon feast. They can be viewed safely from places like Brooks Camp. Gawking in awe at these giant bears, you know that you're really in Alaska. One by one, the wonders of the earth were drawn into the vast system of America's national parks, becoming a model to other peoples, other nations, of the preservation of the best. These are sanctuaries, inviting perishing breeds to thrive again. These are shrines to human renewal, the reawakening of the sense of wonder we knew as children, to see once more as though for the first time. These parks bind us. The people of the United States are brought together by them in a special way. They are in more than the states they're in, and Arizona, and Alaska. These parks are, in themselves, states of being, like memories of the Garden of Eden. Let us go into the 21st century with the resolve that these parks are forever.